Hey everyone, in this video I want to dive into the network security perimeter feature. Today we have many types of resources that integrate with a virtual network, a VM, a container host, pods, and when those things live in that virtual network, we have fantastic capabilities to control the communication between resources. I can use network security groups, app security groups. I can put Azure Firewall in the mix and change the routing. I can use NVAs. And that's not just resource-to-resource communication. I can control what other resources and things outside they're allowed to talk to. So I can stop things like data exfiltration, where data is within some resource and some bad actor is trying to copy it to another resource that they can then go and do various things with. Now, we can also integrate those platform as a service resources into our virtual network using things like private endpoints, and then turn off their regular internet-facing endpoint. Some also inject into our virtual network. So that then gives us aspects of the virtual network controls to those PaaS resources like a storage account, a key vault, log analytics workspace. The list goes on, Cosmos DB. But what about the PaaS resources that don't integrate with a virtual network, or we don't need them to for our particular scenario? Maybe you've got PaaS resources talking to each other, or we just have a PaaS resource. We want to be able to control what can talk to it and what it can talk to. And historically, we've had far less capability here. If we think about a typical Azure resource, so I've got a particular instance of an Azure resource. And if you look at it, there's a networking configuration, and you can control aspects of, think of it as having its own little PaaS firewall, and I can control certain aspects of the network configuration. For example, one of the things I can do is I can configure certain inbound rules, so what it will allow communication from. And with that, I can do things like, hey, CIDR ranges, particular sets of IP addresses that are publicly routable. I can configure things like, hey, from a certain subnet, this is where you use a service endpoint. I can also define private endpoints. So a private endpoint is an IP address within my virtual network that communicates to a specific instance of a specific resource. But not all Azure resources have that same level of inbound control. I think Azure Monitor, for example, I don't have those same sets of capabilities. But then if you think about Outbound, what it's allowed to go and talk to, well, it's practically non-existent for most PaaS resources. When I think about, hey, the outbound controls, well, generally I'm going to be pretty sad. And that makes things like stopping data exfiltration very, very difficult. And then I can think about, well, what about PaaS to PaaS resource access? So if I have another Azure resource over here, what about controlling, well, this resource is allowed to talk to this particular resource? And historically, that has not really existed either. The best we've typically seen is the ability really at the resource provider level. So it's a storage account, so it's then all storage accounts. So I'd only be able to maybe allow a certain set of resource providers, and then any instance of that particular type would be allowed to talk. Or maybe I can say, hey, for trusted services. But I've really not had a lot of control. Hey, allow Azure services to access, allow trusted Microsoft services to bypass, allow only storage, et cetera, but it's really not very granular. So I didn't have good capability here. So when I think of those things, it gives us a number of key challenges. Firstly, we are just missing a complete set of inbound, outbound, and PaaS to PaaS controls across the different types of services. The configuration for these, well, it's configured at a per resource level. I'm configuring its network configuration and what it's allowed to do. So it varies by the type of resource exactly what the capabilities are, and it's inconsistent. And then it can be very hard to actually audit in a consistent manner what is actually performing the access. Now, as you would expect, this is where the network security perimeter feature comes in and solves these problems. And how this is going to work is I think about creating a network security perimeter. So I'm going to create this new type of resource. So this is going to be my network security perimeter. And it's a particular instance of a network security perimeter. And then what I'm going to do is associate different Azure resources with this network security perimeter. So I'm going to go and say, hey, I've got, again, resource 1, a resource 2, and a resource 3. So I'm associating specific instances of Azure resources with this particular instance of a network security perimeter. And straight away, that's going to do a few different things for me. It instantly simplifies the service-to-service communication for the particular instances that are within it. Because what it's going to let me do is those PaaS resources that I have put inside the same network security perimeter instance can now go ahead and talk to each other straight away. So I've solved that challenge of which instances can talk to which other instances. So that's going to help me stop things like data exfiltration because, hey, this storage account can be communicated to from these services, but not some other storage account sitting out here. But it also enables me to define inbound and outbound rules for all of those things in the network security perimeter. And I can even actually create different sets of rules for different resources within there because maybe I want slightly different things. So I'm now going to be able to configure those inbound rules. So I can think about, okay, well, inbound, yes. I can now define sets of rules, and I can also define, yes, outbound sets of rules for all the different things that I'm going to have. So I'll get this nice consistent experience across all of the different resources. And as we'll see, I have full logging. So from the audit perspective, I'm going to be able to see all of the traffic that was allowed to come in, was allowed to go out, that spoke between the resources, things that were denied. Now, something I do want to call out straight away. Any resource within that network security perimeter that supports it must have a managed identity assigned to it. Because what's happening behind the scenes is the token that is given to the resource for its managed identity will get populated with the NSP it belongs to, so the GUID of the NSP. And so then when it tries to talk to something else within the NSP, it will check, well, are you the same NSP as me? In which case, yes, I'll let you communicate. So a huge, absolutely must have, if it supports it, you have to have the managed identity enabled for every resource that can have a managed identity that needs to establish outbound to the other resources in the NSP. So you have to have that. It will actually warn you if I associate a resource with the NSP and it doesn't have a managed identity, and it could, that, hey, you've not got the managed identity set up, you need to go and do this. Now, it can be user assigned or managed or system assigned. It doesn't matter. It just needs to have access to a managed identity so that its token can get populated with the ID of the NSP. So it can then make sure, hey, you are the same NSP as the resource I'm trying to talk to, so it will work. Sometimes it's not always obvious, like a storage account, I added that via the CLI. So that's kind of a key point around this. So absolutely make sure you enable those managed identities, or it won't be able to establish the outbound connection to other things within the NSP. So super important. Now, it's actually very easy to configure. And what we can actually do is we'll jump over. So you can see I've already got a network security perimeter. You can also just type NSP in your search and it will show you, hey, look, network security perimeters. But we can look at what the creation experience is. Now, a few things to notice here. It lives in a resource group, as you would normally expect. It has a certain name. And you'll notice it's creating a default profile. Now I can change this name, but this is what the rules are going to belong to. So as we go through this configuration, one of the things we're actually going to see is if I think about this network security profile, it has to have at least one profile. So we go, okay, so we have to have at least profile 1 or default profile. You can change that name. And this is where those inbound rules and outbound rules live. Now, as we'll see later on, I can absolutely go and add additional profiles. So I could add a profile 2, which again would have its own in and outbound sets of rules, and then associate specific resources in the NSP with a specific set of rules. But we'll come back to that later on. But the key point is, initially, it's going to prompt you for, hey, what do you want that name to be? So I can actually go and change all those things. Because remember, we always like least privilege, least access. Just because all of these things need to talk to each other doesn't mean I need all of them to be able to be spoken to from things outside the NSP in the same manner, or talk to the same things outbound. So we still want the least sets of access. So maybe this resource, well, it needs access from these bunch of different things, but these don't. So I would create one profile for this resource and then a different profile for these, so they're always having just enough communication. Another thing to note, the profiles today are children of the NSP instance. So if I have lots of NSPs, multiple NSPs, I do have to define the profiles and the rules for each NSP. I can't define a profile with the sets of rules and then today use it on lots of different NSPs. You can't do that right now. But anyway, if we jump back over to our experience, so we've got that, hey, default profile. I could then go and add the various resources. Now, for the most part, it's only going to show you resources that are supported. So you're going to see storage accounts and key vaults and SQL Server. If we look at the documentation, today it's these. So Azure Monitor, Azure AI Search, Cosmos DB, Event Hub, Key Vault, SQL DB, and storage. It will grow over time. This is the initial sets of resources that are supported, but that's absolutely going to increase as time goes on. But you would select the resources you want. You could add more later on. And then you can go and set the various rules. Now, one thing to be very clear here, a resource can exist in one and only one NSP. I cannot take this resource and associate it with NSP1 and NSP2 and NSP3. You can't do that today. So a resource can exist in a single NSP. And now I would go and define the rules. Now, if we look for the inbound rules, you give it a rule name, and it can be source IP or subscription. So those are my two options. Now, you'll notice today I cannot specify another NSP, so I can't link NSPs today. So what I can have here is IP ranges and other subscriptions. So the key point about this is, hey, I have some set of resources, but maybe actually I have another subscription or set of subscriptions, and they all need to be able to go and talk to these resources. Maybe this is some core set that is used by many, many different things. Now, in that scenario, remember, managed identity and the identity in the token is how a lot of this is validated. So if I'm enabling other subscriptions, and this subscription has a bunch of resources in it, each of those resources must have a managed identity as well, or it will not be able to associate. Because in this case, it needs to look at the token given to this managed identity and check what is the owning subscription. And then it can say, oh, well, is this identity that's trying to access me, which subscription is it from? oh, it's within the subscriptions that are allowed. Okay, I'm going to allow you access then. So that's a super important point. Always think, if it's NSP, I need to have a managed identity to enable it to function. So we go and look, and if I actually change this to subscriptions, I just go and set a checkbox against the subscriptions in my tenant. And then for Outbound, Outbound is just fully qualified domain names. So I can do the FQDNs of things that it needs to be able to go and talk to. So on this side, I'm going to go and define the various fully qualified domain names. So those are the key controls we have around there that we're going to leverage as part of this. And now we have an NSP. Now, if I look at one I created earlier, so I'm just going to cancel this out and look at the one I've already created. For my NSP, and if I go to settings, you'll actually see, hey, there's my profiles, and there's all the associated resources with the NSP. If I go to the profiles, or here, I can just go and add a new profile. And I'll get those same experience. I can go and add all those same things. And I can pick the particular resources from the NSP, or I can add other ones to the NSP that I want to be part of this profile. Likewise, when I look at the associated resources, it will show me I've got 3 in this currently: a storage account, a key vault, and log analytics workspace. And it shows me which profile it is part of. If I want to, then I had other profiles, I can click the 3 dots and move it to another profile. So I can easily move these things around as I need to. And this is also where it would show me, hey, there's a problem with the managed identity. You'd see a column here showing me there's an issue with that. Now, also something interesting you're going to see here is this idea of an access mode. And the default is going to be learning. And then you can manually change it to enforced if you want to. So this is a really important point. Think about what we're going to do here. We are going to change how resources can talk to each other and how other things can do inbound and outbound. So at a per resource level, you configure the idea of the access mode. And its default is learning. You'll also hear it called transition. But I could also change it to enforced. It's always going to start off in learning mode. And the way learning mode works is it's looking at what the rules are defined on the NSP. But if it doesn't find a matching rule for traffic that's trying to come in or out, it will then go and look at what is the resource's own firewall configuration to decide if the traffic should flow through or not. And this is always a good idea. Whenever I try and put in any kind of control on something, it's nice to put it in an audit mode first, just to see, well, what would happen? So when it's in learning mode, hey, something that's trying to talk to something and I forgot to add a particular correct inbound rule, well, it would say, oh, this would have been denied, but it went through because the resource's own rule currently still allows that traffic to go through. Now, while it's in learning mode, then what I care about is obviously getting those logs so I can learn and say, well, what is it actually using? So what I would do here under monitoring, it's the good old diagnostic settings. And we see this with all of the standard Azure resources. I've already added this, but you'll see all the different types of traffic. So public inbound access was allowed, was denied. Outbound was allowed, was denied. Within the same perimeter, public inbound allowed by PaaS resource rule. So this is saying, hey, look, the NSP rule wouldn't have allowed it, but the PaaS resource rule did. So I can select which ones I actually want to enable and then where I want to send it to. So it's the standard log analytics workspace, a storage account, or an event hub. So I have all of those standard options. So this is how, when it's in learning, and I get the same logs in enforced mode as well, because that's how we get auditing, I can see, well, what actually would be being used as part of all of these different things. So absolutely a key point here is I want to go and configure the diagnostic settings. And as part of that, I can turn on the various logs and send it to those usual suspects, log analytics workspace, storage account, or an event hub. And if I send it to a log analytics workspace, you'll have something called an NSP access logs table. So this is NSP access logs, and that's where I'll be able to go and see everything. And again, once I turn this on, it's not just in learning mode, enforced mode will show these as well. So that's how I get this idea of my audit. Whatever access I need to track using these diagnostic settings is how I can actually go and see that. Now, a key point, that log analytics workspace, because think about what we're doing here, needs to be in the same NSP as the resources that are part of the NSP, because it's obviously sending data into it. So make sure you put the log analytics workspace in the same NSP that's actually being captured. And once we actually go ahead and turn that on, I can go and jump over to logs. And this is showing the new log analytics workspace kind of simplified view. And I can select the table, and I've got my NSP access logs. And then I'll be able to go and see all of the different data. Now, I only created this one this morning and did a few little tests connecting to it, but you'll see the time, you can see the category, you can see which profile was it part of, you can see the service, the matched rule, the source IP address, the source port, source protocol. So you get all of the different information inbound, and then was it allowed? Was it denied? Was it the NSP rule or was it the resource rule? It'll show you if there's denied ones, you can see here. So it gives me all of the full detail to allow me to actually do the right things here. Now, once I was confident that I've got all of the right rules, well then I can just go to the resources, and you can see I've changed it for one of them already, but you can change it to enforced mode. So I would just go over to the resource and say, change access mode, and I would change it to enforced. And now only if it actually has the NSP with the correct rule would it allow me to access it. It will now ignore the local firewall configuration of the resource. So as soon as it's enforced, it doesn't care now if its own local network configuration of the resource would have allowed it through. It's not processed anymore. As soon as it's enforced, it's only the rules of the NSP that will be allowed to be used. So again, do the learning, the transition first, take some time, let it run, learn what the correct access needs to be for you to function in your organization. You don't want to break a production app. And then once you're confident that you know all of the right configurations, then you can think about changing it to the enforced mode, and these resource level rules are not used anymore. Now, if I was using service endpoints, so allowing things in a certain subnet in a VNet to talk to the resource, they don't work anymore. Those will fail to function, so things in the subnet that are service endpoint to a resource will not work. You need to switch to private endpoints. Private endpoints will work. So if I have a private endpoint in a VNet over here to this resource, it's just going to carry on working. I don't have to do anything. That data plane traffic is just going to continue to function. I don't have to do anything special. I don't have to add the private endpoint to an inbound rule. I don't have to do anything else. Now, one other thing I guess I should talk about, it's rolling out right now, so it's going to vary by resource, but we're used to the idea on a resource level, you could kind of configure, oh, is inbound allowed or not allowed from the internet. They're rolling out this new idea of secured by perimeter. So one of the things I can do, I'm going to switch over to the preview portal here, just super quick. And if I look at a storage account, so I'm looking at the networking of a storage account, and you can see this public network access. And if I click manage, one of the things you now have is it's not just enable or disable, but I can say secured by perimeter. So it's saying it's going to be configured by a network security perimeter, but maybe it's not yet. So what this means is what I could do is for any new resource, for example, that gets created, I could say, hey, I want to turn on its configuration to say secured by perimeter, even if it's not associated with one yet. As soon as I do that, it will block all inbound and all outbound. Basically, only private endpoint traffic would work to it. So if I want to be kind of that most secure, I can change a resource on creation to secured by perimeter, so nothing will be able to talk to it initially, and then I go and associate and put it into an NSP, and then the rules of the NSP will take effect, and it will be able to talk to other things within the NSP. So that's one way to kind of lock those things down. I'll also be able to use Azure Policy. So I could use Azure Policy to say, hey, as resources get created, maybe set that secured by perimeter as a default, and then maybe I associate it to a default NSP. And I could always go and move it out and then put it into a different NSP later on. So that Azure Policy ability to configure sort of automatically, that's something that you're going to be able to do as well. And that was really it. I mean, it's actually a fairly simple thing, but it's super powerful. It solves those pain points. I now have a consistent set of controls for inbound to the PaaS resources, outbound to the PaaS resources, and just these set of PaaS resources to really help with those exfiltration concerns. I have the profiles, so I can define specific sets of rules. So even within the NSP, this resource has these sets of in and out, these have a different set, so I can still do that least access. And of course, I get that full audit. I still have that ability, even, yes, it's super useful when it's learning, but even the post-learning, just in the ongoing, hey, I got full access of what is actually talking to those various things. So I hope that was useful. You can go and start playing with this now and learning it and see how it can apply to your resources. Till next video, take care.